Hello, everyone. My name is Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, and I am the president of the Middle East Policy Council. I want to welcome our audience from around the world for this discussion. As we know, a terrible cycle of violence began October 7th, when Hamas launched a brutal and horrific attack against Israel. But this is just the latest round of appalling death. And so far, upwards of 20,000 people, men, women, and children from both sides have lost their lives. The world, aghast, has called repeatedly for a ceasefire. There is grave doubt that Israel can reach its stated military goals, and Hamas's threats of repeated attacks against Israel verge on nihilism. Palestinians and Israelis must return to the negotiating table. There is no military solution. This current round of destruction endangers the entire region and beyond. But it has also brought our attention firmly back to the necessity of a negotiated settlement, a two-state solution. Today, we'll hear from the authors of a thoughtful and informed frame for how we get to this settlement. Both are experienced diplomats steeped in the region's issues. Former Egyptian ambassador Abderahman Salaheldin and former Israeli ambassador Michael Harari will discuss their proposals for establishing a Palestinian state. I'm pleased that today's discussion will be moderated by MEPC's Executive Director, Ms. Basma Al-Hussein, a proud Palestinian American. Israeli and Palestinian voices must be centered in any discussion of their futures. There are hard choices and hard steps ahead for both. Today's discussion is designed to help bring light to those choices that will help move today's tragedy to tomorrow's history. So let's get started. I turn it over to Ms. Al-Hussein. Basma?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Basma Al-Hussein, and I'm the Executive Director of the Middle East Policy Council. I am pleased to also welcome all of you to this incredibly important and timely discussion. Before I turn over to our panelists, I would like to say a few words about our organization. We are a 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit educational institution based in Washington, D.C. The Council was established in 1981 for the purpose of strengthening U.S.-MENA relations by promoting open dialogue and education. In order to accomplish this, we have three foundational pillars. Our first pillar is our Policy Products and Programming series, which provides administration officials, members of Congress and their staff, diplomats, and other relevant stakeholders with timely, accurate, and concise information regarding breaking news issues. Two, our world-renowned quarterly journal, Middle East Policy, which features in-depth analysis from experts around the globe on ongoing long-term issues of interest to U.S.-MENA policy. Our journal is proudly circulated to over 16,000 educational institutions worldwide, in addition to being available through an online subscription, which you can find a link to on our website. Our third and final pillar is our educational and professional development pillar, which is designed to engage the entire school to leadership program and invest in tomorrow, today. Our programs include Teach Mideast, which is catered to secondary school students and teachers, and our 40 under 40 Rising Leaders in MENA, U.S.-MENA Relations Professional Development Program. Today, we are honored to speak with former Egyptian Ambassador Abderahman Salaheldin and former Israeli Ambassador Michael Harari regarding their recent article, Peace Needs a New Balfour Declaration, a Biden Declaration. In this piece, the ambassadors assess that there is no military solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and advocate for U.S. President Joe Biden to make a declaration outlining a one-year plan that would end with launching negotiations for the establishment of an independent and viable Palestinian state based on the territories occupied by Israel in 1967. We hope that evaluating this recommendations and its specifications will educate and empower this high-level audience with a potential next step proposal that may be integrated into policy solutions. And with that, I'd like to invite Ambassador Abderahman Salaheldin to provide his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Basma. And thank you, Ambassador, for both of your very kind introduction. Both my dear friend, Ambassador Harari, and I have many things in common. We both served for 4 decades as dedicated diplomats to defend our respective countries' interests, but through diplomacy. We both, too, have grandchildren about the same age, and we both are aspiring for those grandchildren to live in a better and safer Middle East than the one we lived in and our kids lived in. Our idea is to invite the US President, President Joe Biden, to take a leading role in setting the end game of a negotiating process that would lead to the establishment of a Palestinian state. The same way the famous British Foreign Secretary at the time, Lord Balfour, about 100 years ago, promised a national homeland for the Jewish people. What we are calling for is actually for this US leading role to make up for the absence of a ready body politic on both sides. Neither the Israeli government nor the Palestinian leadership are now ready to make this historic commitments for obvious reasons. And because the lack of any political progress in the last quarter of a century or so, only radicals and religious fanatics were empowered on both sides. And the result is what we see today in Gaza, the massacre of civilians on both sides, innocent Israeli civilians and innocent Palestinian civilians, women, children, are now, as we speak, losing their lives in thousands. What October 7th and the aftermath taught us was that no military or technological superiority would guarantee Israel its security. We also learned the hard way that weakening the national Palestinian leadership and empowering the religious fanatics would only turn this political conflict into a religious, irreconcilable dispute that could only be resolved by weapons. And I think this war showed us that there is no military solution to this dispute. And I think contrary to the claims of both sides, victory is very elusive and could hardly be defined for any one of them. And we could continue to lose thousands of lives, of innocent lives, without achieving any military target by both sides. The last and final lesson, to my mind, of October 7th and its aftermath is that the continuation of the Israeli military occupation of the Palestinian land that Israel occupied since 1967 and the control of millions of Palestinians will never be sustained. And this is why we need to find a political solution for this problem. And our eyes are now on the US leadership. I know it's an election year. We know that it is difficult, but our target audience, actually, both Michael and I, are the American public opinion, are the American Jewish organization, American Arabs. We would like all of those who would like to see peace happening to support our call for President Biden to launch this negotiating process, but to declare beforehand the end game, so it would be quite different than any previous processes. Lastly, we would hope that the US would push for a United Nations resolution setting the parameters for United Nations Security Council resolution that would set the parameters for this Palestinian state and to make sure that it is viable, contiguous, and independent. Of course, in the parameters, it needs to be highlighted that security arrangements to guarantee the security of the state and the people of Israel is part and parcel of this package. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Ambassador Harari, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for hosting us in your think tank. Thank you very much, Ambassador Winston Abercrombie. It's brilliant to see you again, although only on screen for the time being. And it is a privilege, of course, to be with my dear friend, Ambassador Salaheldin. He expressed in an excellent way, basically, what we are aiming to. But I would like, with your permission, to share with you some of the, let's say, preliminary discussions that we had, which basically led us to this idea or to this article. The first point is that we try to think what can be done in order to end this war in a way which basically serves most of the interests of both sides. Clearly, of course, Israel and the Palestinians. And we had few points that we took it in a way as a kind of, let's say, assumptions, or let's say as starting points. The first one was Hamas is not in power in Gaza, dismantling their military capability. The second one is Israel does not stay in the Gaza Strip. It does not reoccupy the Gaza Strip. The third one, no vacuum should be there, because as you know, vacuum is basically produces, let's say, a chaos or much more radical elements to be there. And of course, to keep on regional stability and to avoid wider escalation in the region. Now, in order to do it, I suppose we need to have few things to be done, let's say. The first one, we have to have an alternative address for Gaza, which means that if we do not want Hamas, we should have an alternative. And spoiler, the only alternative, the only relevant alternative, the only legitimate alternative is the Palestinian Authority. Of course, I will elaborate a little bit more about the challenges facing that. The second point, we need an international force in order to be able, let's say, to dismantle or to collect weapons and to enable IDF, to enable Israel to withdraw from Gaza Strip. We need to release, of course, hostages. We need a huge, intensive, wide humanitarian assistance and reconstructions of the Gaza Strip. And we need a political horizon. Absolutely. Now, we are not naive, of course, and we are very much aware of the difficulties and challenges. On the Israeli side, as you know, the Israeli government is not very much enthusiastic about, let's say, political horizon, not to mention two-state vision, not to mention, let's say, the Palestinian Authority itself, okay? And on the Palestinian side, as Ambassador Salaheldin mentioned, of course, I mean, we have a PA which is very weak, not very popular, let's say, even within the Palestinian public opinion, no elections since 2006. So we need, of course, I mean, to deal with these challenges. Now, in our opinion, what should be done, okay, the first point is that to emphasize to all relevant actors that the only legitimate, the only respected, the only acceptable, let's say, address to rule Gaza in a process, of course, it's the Palestinian Authority. Definitely, there is a necessity, of course, to strengthen its capabilities, as it is discussed, as you know, let's say, in the last few days between the US and the PA. There is a necessity of political horizon. Political horizon is needed because, A, this is the only way how we will be able to convince or to be able, let's say, to include the PA back to Gaza Strip. This is the only way, correct me if I'm wrong, to convince regional and international actors to be involved, to support this process, let's say, to finance, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, this is the only alternative. I mean, because if we say no Hamas, who is going to be instead of Hamas? No alternative means only military means, okay? And as Ambassador Salaheldin said, there are no military solutions to this conflict. And so we reach to this point where the only player, the only actor who can push for a political horizon which will enable this, let's say, achievement to be achieved is, of course, the US. Now, the idea of the Balfour Declaration model was introduced by my dear friend, Ambassador Salaheldin, and I did like it very much, because basically what it says that there is an international obligation to go forward for solving this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, I'm not going to be, I'm not a political commentator, how much it is possible, let's say, in an election year or not. The point is that if we want to end this war in the most, let's say, not productive, of course, way, but in a way that will enable us to move ahead, this is what we need, a Biden declaration. Paradoxically, we should make enormous efforts that October the 7th, that its aim was to destroy or not to enable any peace process, actually open the gate for a peace process and maybe brought the Palestinian state or the end of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to its solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Salaheldin and Ambassador Harari, for those extremely illuminating remarks. Now, before I begin the moderated discussion portion of our event today, I would like to invite audience members to submit a question to the organization by sending an email to info@mepc.org. Again, if you would like to submit an audience question for either of our panelists, please submit it to info@mepc.org. I will now move on to today's predetermined questions. Gentlemen, in your piece, you both assert that there is no military solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and you argue that most Arabs and Israelis also agree. Despite this assessment, Israel has continued to expand its air and ground operations in the Gaza Strip, killing close to 20,000 Palestinians. Sadly, 70% of which are women and children. Drawing on your experience in the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Ambassador Harari, can you please speak to the long-term goals of the Israeli government that contribute to their willingness to continue this military operation in the face of both international and domestic backlash?
Sure. Well, the short answer is that October the 7th basically produced this tragic, very tragic, of course, military operation, which basically, to be honest, up to now enjoys enormous support by the Israeli public opinion. And I suppose that all can, we can understand that. The tragic thing about it is that it does have enormous tragic price on the Palestinian side, absolutely. But what we have emphasized, and I think that it is clear in Israel, nevertheless, it is not become too public, and nevertheless, the present government in Israel, let's say, preferred before October the 7th different way, that no military solution to this conflict. Yes, there is a need or necessity of military campaign in order to dismantle Hamas. Yes, you are right, or whoever is right, by raising question marks how much it is achievable and what does it mean to dismantle Hamas. But this is why we emphasize that in order to dismantle Hamas, and put aside what does it mean, okay? In order to dismantle Hamas and to enable peace and to end these tragic losses of life on both sides, we need to have the political element, the political horizon. I hope I did answer the question.
Thank you. And this question is now for both of you. Do you think it is possible for Israel to achieve its stated goal of eradicating Hamas?
Should I start, or Ambassador Abderahman?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Once again, the question is, if Israel can achieve its goals concerning dismantling Hamas?
Yeah, that's a question.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think that Israel can achieve most of it, to be honest, let's say. Can achieve most of it militarily, yes. It will take much more time. It will take much more casualties. But in order to achieve the results that Israel itself does want to achieve, we need to have this political envelope. Bear in mind that we have nowadays, or in the last, let's say, few years, quite rare and fascinating common interest in the region between almost all the actors, moderate actors, of course, that we cannot enable Hamas or radicals to achieve or to win this game. So in order not to enable those radicals to achieve their end game or to spoil a peace process, we need to dismantle militarily as much as possible, let's say, Hamas capabilities, but as well, and sooner than later, push for the political element, even if the relevant actors, including Israel, are not very much enthusiastic on that right now or today. This is, I think, very much important.
Excellent, thank you.
Well,
now, go ahead, do you have anything to add, Ambassador?
Yes, if you want me to respond to the same question, I also answer that it is very easy to measure losses in military hardware, even in in the count of people who would die and how many would die on both sides. But the problem with many organizations like Hamas, that they have both the military side and also the social side, the idea side. And as far as resisting occupation, as long as we will have Israeli occupation of Palestinian land, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, there will be support for an organization like Hamas. There will be support for resistance. And the right way to solve this problem is to end the occupation. And this is actually was the premise of both Michael and myself, that we started thinking of the Egyptian-Israeli model. The Egyptian-Israeli model of peace, of 40 years of solid peace between the two countries, provided both countries and both people with the best formula for security. While the absence of such peace on the Israeli-Palestinian front made it impossible. This is not the first war that we have between Israel and Hamas or Israel and Gaza. This is the sixth war, actually. We have similar wars went on in the north as well with Hezbollah, etc. And we don't want to empower those in the Arab world who would say Israel would understand only the language of force and the using of force. This is we will be playing in the hands of radicals. Our radicals are telling us, you peace advocates prove to be a failure. For 40 years, you were not able to produce such a peace for the Palestinian. We would like to prove them wrong once and for all. And I like very much what Ambassador Harari said, that we should turn this war into an opportunity of peace, exactly like we did 50 years ago when we turned the 1973 war between Israel and Egypt into this marvelous launch pad for peace that we are today enjoying its benefits. And there are many lessons to be learned from the Egyptian-Israeli peace that could be applied to the Israeli-Palestinian peace and could be incorporated in such parameters that could be announced by President Biden.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ambassador Salaheldin, for adding your input to that very critical question. And that is a great segue to my next question. So as we all know, the United States continues to supply weapons to the IDF during their current operations in Gaza. My question for you all is, one, is U.S. leadership key to progress? Or should other states, for example, Egypt or Jordan, take more of a leadership role in mediating the conflict? Secondly, if so, how would other states who are engaged in the conflict, for example, Qatar, be integrated into this plan? And does the fact that we continue to supply weapons to Israel elevate Jordan, Egypt, or Qatar, or another country as a primary partner in mediating this conflict and finding a peaceful solution?
Well, I would be happy to take that first if you want me to. It is because of the US supplies of weapons, economic support, and this special relationship that connects the United States with Israel, it is because of this relationship that we look to the US to make the difference and to influence Israel in a positive way, to encourage it, first, to stop the war, second, to commit to this transitional period that would fulfill its security in one hand and would also open the way for the Palestinian implementation of their national aspirations. The same happened, if you remember, 50 years ago with Egypt. It was because of those supplies, military hardware supplies, economic assistance, that the US has the leverage with several Israeli governments, not one. And ultimately, it worked. Of course, we need to have active regional participation of the peace partners. Egypt and Jordan are the two peace partners of Israel today. It's a very successful peace partnership, actually. So yes, we are, and our initiative here is one kind of, we are not government, we are not representing our government policies, but we are inspired by this peace experience that we would like to apply some of the lessons, and the US have these lessons ready to be used, such as the phased implementation of the Israeli-Egyptian peace. It took us 5 years to get our land back after the Israeli withdrawal, and some of it, actually, we got it back through arbitration. Not only negotiation, mediation, but arbitration, the strip called Taba. And it took us 40 years to revise the security arrangements in Sinai. There were parts of Sinai demilitarized, other parts with reduction of forces. It took us 40 years of confidence building and solid peace in order to get the Israelis to invite us to send back our tanks, helicopters, and F-16s to fight terrorists, a common threat to both countries. I can foresee a similar experience between Israelis and Palestinians, both in Gaza, in the West Bank, and also lessons on how to share Jerusalem.
I fully agree with Ambassador Abderahman said. Absolutely, of course. I would just will add very briefly that the beauty of the Israeli-American relationship is that they are rich, wide, deep, and long-term, and both sides are able, let's say, to be supported by each other and to convince each other even on unagreed, let's say, topics. I think that the fact that President Biden came to Israel just after the attack, the fact that President Biden during the Hanukkah lighting said very honest and open comments about Israel, I think it only emphasized this unique relationship. This unique relationship should be, I wouldn't say used, but should be should influence, let's say, both sides and the region for peace. Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. And that's a great segue to my next question, which is last week, the United States President Joe Biden warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the indiscriminate bombing of civilians may erode international support for Israel. In a subsequent statement, Netanyahu shared that there is, quote unquote, disagreement between the US and Israel about the day after Hamas. So to you, Ambassador Harari, where might the US and Israeli priorities diverge, and could your proposal be a potential solution to this?
Well, again, this is this is only emphasize, I would say, the what I did call in a diplomatic way the beauty of American-Israeli relations. Yes, it is not a secret that there are some disagreements, absolutely, of course, and it is not a secret that President Biden is not very much enthusiastic about the composition of this present government in Israel. Some Israelis are not as well, but we need, let's say, to work with what it is workable in order to move ahead. So I think this is why we came out with this Biden declaration. This is why we believe that taking advantage of this relationship, with or without agreements, nevertheless, some of the disagreements are public. It does have an urgency, I would say, to initiate such a political move. Now, I'm not very much worried about this disagreement, because basically, I mean, if we agree about everything, it's too easy, isn't it? I mean, to be honest, let's say. I'm not trying, to beautify the present situation, but to say that nevertheless of these disagreements, since Washington and Jerusalem enjoy so deep, a long-term, fruitful relationship, Washington does have the ability and, in a way, the responsibility, or even, I don't want to say the obligation, but yes, I mean, the US cannot, I would say, escape of its, how to say it, its role or its expectation or the expectations of others. And in this Israeli-Arab conflict, I think it is very much needed.
Excellent, thank you. We have
may I have a follow-up on
Yes,
Michael's? I fully agree with what Michael said. I just want to follow up on it, because there are other dimensions other than the bilateral relations between Israel and the United States. There is the tragedy of what is going on in Gaza today, and actually in the West Bank. There are many who are killed with no crime. So I'm worried that all this killing would make it very hard for any peace effort to be successful later on. We are turning many people into orphans, and these are the natural recruits for any frustrated effort of terrorism. And I really warn against this. And this terrorism is not going to be only against Israel. It's going to be against everyone. I would dare to say everyone in the region and beyond that. This is one aspect, and one extra motivation for the US to move in. Second is the escalation possibilities. Today, the US is forming a new naval force to try to protect the traffic in the Red Sea. And our economy is hardly hit in Egypt because of what the Houthis are doing against ships that are going into the Red Sea, going to Israel or to the Suez Canal. Escalation could happen in a second, and we are all exposed here, and our cities are exposed. Our civilians are exposed. American soldiers who are in the region, and there is about 40,000 of them, are exposed. And this is another incentive for the US to intervene, and to intervene expeditiously. as soon as possible.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. I do want to let you know that we are getting quite a few audience questions coming in, so I'd like to include them as best I can. And so one of the audience members has asked, you both have emphasized the importance of international support for the return to peace and the lasting construction of a Palestinian state. What form should this international task force take? And how could it be made permanently representative and equidistant between the two parties? The lack of political continuity or commitment among mediators, especially Western, in previous peace processes, has indeed been one of the reasons for their failure. Who would like to speak to that?
I can try, and I'm sure Michael will have his own ideas as well. As for the international force, I think we projected two kind of forces, or one force with dual function. One that has some security functions to it, to make sure that that Gaza is not going to turn to be a source of military threat to Israel and its population. And there is another aspect of that force or international team or whatever, is how to help Gaza reconstruct, how to help Gaza return to normal life. I think in many areas, we will need to start from scratch, and we will need international help from everywhere. As far as the structure of the force, we have many examples, successful examples, both sponsored by the United Nations or a multinational force and observer like the one in Sinai. So this is not. As for previous effort to produce agreements through negotiations and mediation, etc., the peace processes that turned to be a real bad word because of their failure in our region. This is exactly why we suggested the Biden declaration.
So on
the end of
go ahead.
So the end game would be clear from the very beginning. What these negotiations would lead to would be very clear in the minds of those, especially Palestinians, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, on how this process would end.
Excellent. So an audience member submitted a question, and it is a follow-up specifically regarding the Biden declaration. The question is, would a Biden declaration need to be the equivalent of the Balfour Declaration in the sense that U.S. troops would need to be in both Gaza and the West Bank as more than just a possible part of an international peacekeeping force? British troops left 30 years later in embarrassing circumstances, but they'd partly assisted the formation of the Jewish national home on the ground during that time. Without a proper US military presence, then the proposed peacekeeping force might seem like UNIFIL in Lebanon, powerless. What are your thoughts and reaction to this?
Well,
but you yourself answered this, Basma, because when you said that this special relationship between the United States and Israel, the supply of weapons, Biden's visit during the war, this special relationship would not require any military presence on the ground. They have good leverage with their friends in Israel, believe me. And if they would like to stop the settlement activities in the West Bank, they can weigh in at least during the negotiation. If they would like to start a serious negotiating process, they can do something in this regard without military presence. But I have the Palestinians do not mind at all if the US troops are there. And they do not mind even if NATO is there.
Okay, so
If I
you
may.
all, go ahead.
Sure, very briefly. Okay. No, the answer is no. No military troops, American military. Absolutely no. The Balfour model or formula, or our use of the Balfour name, let's say, is to emphasize, let's say, in a way, the moral and political obligation of the international community to go ahead. No, this is absolutely very clear. For the international, let's say, mediation or intervention, I mean, it's quite clear, to be honest, let's say, I mean, that the only way to go ahead is by negotiation by both sides. What both sides need is someone grown up enough, let's say, influential enough, let's say, to assist them, okay? And this is what happened in almost every Israeli-Arab conflict, successful one. So no troops, please. No necessity for that.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, you both already touched on the fact that while it might be possible for Israel to eradicate Hamas in its current form, military operations are not going to end extremism. So Hamas could disappear, but another extremist group could easily pop up. But let's say that sometime soon, Israel did kill the final living Hamas member. If they did achieve that objective in the short term, does Israel have a roadmap for the so-called day after?
Well, Israel, for the time being, does not give too much details about its roadmap for the day after. But I think it's very clear in Israel, to be honest, let's say, that even if you kill, as you said, all the last, let's say, Hamas terrorists, the Hamas is beyond it. Hamas is I mean, as my dear friend said, I mean, clearly, correctly, they are there within the Palestinian, of course, arena. In order to be able to defeat Hamas, or in order to be able to strengthen those who are in favor of reaching a peace agreement, let's say, we need to emphasize the alternative. So, yes, we need to have or to dismantle Hamas capabilities in Gaza Strip, okay, not to the last terrorist, I mean, if to put it this way, but in parallel, and this is not of less importance, in parallel, let's say, to raise, to show, to emphasize, to push forward the alternative, the political alternative. So only this combination of the military campaign right now, hopefully will be end sooner than later, okay, as you put it very clearly, let's say, there are too many civilian casualties, and in parallel with the political elements.
Well, the numbers, the Israeli declared numbers of their estimate of Hamas fighters is around 16,000 fighters. And Israel announced recently, I think last week, that they might have been able to kill about 6,000 of them. To do that, they killed 20,000 civilian Palestinians, innocent people who have, and as you said, many of them are women and children. So with this ratio, they could be killing a 250,000 of civilians. And so at what cost? At what cost they would, and there is no guarantee, as you know. I mean, Israel was not able to even release one single hostage through military operations. It was able to release them through exchange of prisoners, through truces, through ceasefire. This is why everyone is asking for a ceasefire. We, Mike and I, are asking for more than ceasefire. We are asking for the end of this war. We are asking for a political horizon. a third element that we need to pay attention to is beyond the killing. There is a humanitarian situation that is developing on the ground in Gaza. And it is really, it could very easily come close to a genocide. I am warning everyone, including the people of Israel, of conscience, that this is really because besieging the Palestinians and denying them water, food, and energy could really turn into a genocide and a crime of war. So all these together, put together, need the civilized world to jump in and try to put an end to this war.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those remarks. And it is tragic, definitely. And your article recommends a potential solution, which is obviously so needed at this time. In it, you advocate for a one-year transitional period to end with an invitation for the PLO or PA to form a governing body in Gaza. Can you give us your assessment of whether this political transition might be accepted by the PLO, PA, and also by the population of Gaza? Is it realistic that existing Hamas members would willingly relinquish power? Please shed more light on what this transition would look like. Ambassador Salaheldin, you stated that in order to create a viable Palestinian state, nearly 200,000 of the 700,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank would need to relocate. Could this relocation be achieved? If so, what would the potential avenues for implementation look like?
Well, the answer is yes, a definite yes. And my proof to this is, first of all, 200,000 Israelis were evacuated from around the Gaza envelope and in the north, near the southern Lebanon border, because of war. I think a similar number could be relocated for peace. When we talk about 1967 borders with equitable swap of land, that means actually everyone understands that Israel is going to keep about 10% of the West Bank, where 80% of its settlement is located, adjacent to the Green Line. In return, Israel would need to give up on an equitable piece of land, most probably in the Negev. And what I am suggesting, but maybe in a different article, that we should expand Gaza. Gaza should be tripled the size of 365 kilometers that we have today. That would bring it closer to the West Bank and would make digging a tunnel between the two wings of the future Palestinian state possible. Whether this happened before or not, yes, ma'am, it did. In Sinai, it was, out of all people, it was General Sharon at the time who pulled out by force the settlers from Sinai, and he did it again in Gaza in 2005. So it is possible, if we have peace, and if this peace enjoy the majority, the support of majority of the population of both sides, you will see them willing to sacrifice.
Okay, gentlemen, we only have a few minutes left, and I have a lot more questions to get through. I don't think I'm going to be able to get through all of them, but let's try to move. So thank you for that analysis, but can you please speak as well to whether or not, you know, the PLO PA is a viable governing body? Are they popular enough? Do they have the faith? Would Gaza recognize their leadership? And can they cooperate? I mean, are they actually an option in this 1-year transitional period that you described? Can you please elaborate on that?
May I?
Yes.
Well, it's please go ahead, Mike.
That's okay. I will be very brief. The answer is that the PA is very weak, as we said. It's I don't think it's very much popular, absolutely, but this is why we emphasize the necessity of this transition period. This is why we think that international force in Gaza is very much needed. This is why we need to strengthen, let's say, the PA. Now, the PA, or Abu Mazen said that he is willing to go into Gaza pending a political process. Pending there is, let's say, end game of a Palestinian state. This is why, as I said before, we have to have in parallel these two things. Only if we have a peace process, a live peace process, the PA will be strengthened, okay? And of course, it has to go through reforms. I want to say one more very short comment. I think that we shouldn't be too naive, to be honest, let's say, to believe that it is possible to dismantle settlements day after tomorrow or next week. What we need with this political horizon is to convince both public opinions, which both of them are extremely skeptic about any possible, let's say, peace process, that we are back and we are doing our utmost in order to achieve it. If you ask me whether the majority of the Israeli public opinion is for peace, or if the majority of the Israeli public opinion, let's say, have enough confidence with the PA, the answer is no, of course not. Why? Because the last 15 years, we had no peace process.
Okay, I understand. So they are a viable solution as long as we first empower them to be. That makes sense. Okay, so next, you both specify that a quote unquote global campaign would need to be launched to rebuild Gaza and transform it into a flourishing economic example of regional and international peaceful cooperation. November reports estimate that reconstruction in Gaza could cost $50 billion, and destruction has only continued since then. What circumstances must be in place for regional partners to commit to providing these funds? And also recognizing that it is the legal obligation of an occupying power to provide for the protection and well-being of the population under its control, what should the international community expect from the Israeli government during this time? What demands should the international community put on Israel to ensure that the occupation is as brief and as possible? And what responsibility does the international community have to help restore Gazan critical infrastructure? Please be quick because I have one final question after.
The responsibility of the international community should be to revive a peace process. Eventually, only a peace process which is negotiated by both sides, whether we like it or not, which is influenced, supported, leveraged, pressured, whatever verb you want to say, this is the only way. Once there is a process, there will be enormous amount of money to reconstruct, including Israeli money. This is not a problem. The real challenge is revive a political process, weakening radical elements, and go ahead.
Wow. Okay.
Probably we need assurances. We need assurances through this political process and political horizon, assurances that there will be no more wars, because this is the 6th war, and after each war, we waged an international campaign to raise money for assistance and reconstruction of Gaza. And all what we have rebuilt during the last maybe 15 years or so have been destroyed in this war. So we need some assurances on one side. On the other side, because of this political horizon and because of the change of atmosphere, we also would like to see a different Israeli handling of how to allow and help assistance going into Gaza for the Palestinians. And for that matter, not only Gaza, but the West Bank as well. And I cannot really...
Thank you, Ambassador. I have one more final question and I want to get it in. Both of you are well aware that U.S. domestic considerations shape our foreign policy. 2024 is an election year in the United States, which will obviously be a persistent factor in the decisions made by political leaders. What information can congressional or administrative staff who are listening to you now bring back to their offices to demonstrate that these steps towards peace are congruent with their own office political objectives and campaigns?
This is a great question, to be honest. Let's say I'm not a political commentator, but the Biden administration up to now has managed this crisis, in my humble opinion, in a very great way, to be honest, let's say. I suppose all will agree that if we are able, or if President Biden can produce, I would say, an end game for the war, productive end game, opening, let's say, peace process out of this war. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is a success story. Now, I think, again, we need to emphasize that we should not be too naive. But if the results are ending the war, opening a window for peace process, I suppose that this is a substantial achievement facing an election. But again, I have less of expertise about American politics, but I suppose this is very much correct to any politician who runs for elections.
I worked with Congress for about 17 years, so I advise congressional leaders and staffers to highlight to their constituency that a Biden effort to end this war and create a political horizon is something in the keen interest of the United States. It would definitely stabilize a region that is vital to the interest of the US, one. Two, it would definitely gain him the support of both the American Jewish community and the American Arab and Muslim community. So in areas like Michigan, where support is critically needed, he would get that support when it is now in question mark. Third, he would be very responsive to the change of public opinion that happened during the last few weeks in the US and in the rest of the Western world, that is now clearly calling for an end of this war. So he would be very responsive to his own public opinion demands, while at the same time, he would be serving the interests of the US and its closest allies in the region, including Israel.
Excellent. Now, at MEPC, we help decision makers tackle the world's biggest challenges by having very important discussions like these around potential solutions and paths forward. And for that reason, I ask all of you who have joined the call and who have participated in today's discussion to please consider making a donation to continue to support this important work at our website, www.mepc.org. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and please continue your good and hard work to make the world a better place.
Thank you.